Today we're going to continue exploring the astrology of December 2025. And in today's episode, we're going to go over the happenings of this second week, which started off with a bang. On December 8th, we had Mars squaring Saturn. And then we have Mercury, the mind, the logos, going on a pretty intense journey over the next few days. Meanwhile, Neptune will be going direct and will be continuing to kind of tie up loose ends in that last anaretic, last degree of Pisces before sailing into Aries and continuing forward, not going back into Pisces in this lifetime. And so, as a reminder, I am Danielle Knapp. I am a certified astrologer and also a mental health therapist. And in this space, we combine the teaching, stories, and cycles of the planets and utilize that as a trailhead in to understand ourselves on a deeper level so that we can live more open-hearted and more authentically. Don't forget to like, share, leave a comment, subscribe, anything and everything that helps kind of move this channel and get more exposure so that it can help the people who would find it useful. Okay, so let's just briefly touch on the Mars squaring Saturn that happened at the beginning of this week. That's intense. You know, we think about the ancients would call, which I don't think there's anything good or bad in astrology, but the ancients would call Mars the lesser maleficent and malefic, and Saturn the greater malefic. So these are kind of the reputation of like the bad boys in astrology. And they get that reputation because there's an intensity to these planets, and also with, there's a real seriousness, demanding, like work hard for your rewards, discipline, fuck around and find out kind of energy from Saturn. And then we have Mars, who is, I've referenced this before, Jessica Lanato, says punch, punch, bang, bang is Mars. He's just ready to go. I heard another description that I really liked where it was like Mars is the builder, Saturn is the contractor. So Mars is like going, 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 and then Saturn shows up and says, brakes on, what are you doing? I don't want it this way. You need to change it like this. You said you were going to do this, but now you're doing this. And there can be a real frustration that comes up with that. And they were squaring each other, which squares are the call to action. It's friction, it's agitation that comes up anytime we have a square. So when we think about this from a psychological lens, we're going to be looking at Saturn as that kind of internal fathering archetype that pushes us and also helps us increase our confidence. All the planets are working for us. They're never working against us. And then we have Mars, which is going to be our assertiveness, our body, how we're taking action out in the world. And there was kind of a grittiness between these two, possibly on Monday and into today. I'm coming to you right now on Tuesday, December 9th, 2025, and they're still squaring each other. And so if we think about, and Saturn's also timing, so this can be delays, this can be, there's also like reality, like almost like a slap in the face with a cold fish of reality. It's like, this is what we're working with. There can be, the answer can be no to something that you maybe wanted the answer to be yes. That's a really common way that Saturn teaches us through lack and by taking things away. So that's a notable mention because there's some intensity with that. So if you're feeling that right now, just know that the cycles will continue, things will change, and you're not alone. If yesterday or today there was some sort of frustrating delay or agitation that came up. Rage is also something that can come up when there are squares happening with Mars, specifically from Saturn. He can get pretty frustrated. He's been kind of fancy free in Sagittarius, just roaming around doing what he wants. And then he kind of bumps into the one who upholds the rules and the standards. So I just wanted to mention that, but let's really dive into Mercury's journey over the next couple days, because there's a lot of great opportunity for shifting of perspective, expansion of the mind, and just a real overhaul in the way that we are thinking about things and connecting to things. Transits that I'm going to focus on have to do with Mercury moving into the last degrees of Scorpio. I have been going on and on about the grand water trine that we have all been swimming in, hopefully going with the flow versus trying to swim against, since late October. This is beginning to fade away as the geometry is beginning to soften as Jupiter moves more into his retrograde, pulling out of the trine with the late degrees of Scorpio. I think he's hitting like 23 degrees of Cancer, so he's not quite in those last few degrees. However, depending on how tightly you do your orbs, there is still some conversation happening as they are sharing an element. So who we are talking about in this grand water trine, as a refresher, we have Jupiter doing his retrograde over in Cancer, and he's at 23 degrees Cancer. We have Saturn, who is now direct at 25 degrees Pisces. And then we have Mercury moving into the last few degrees of Scorpio before he transitions back into Sagittarius. If you have any personal planets or angles and those late degrees of the water signs, you are in this. Like, you are really, really in the churning waters of this grand water trine. And so there's something so striking and beautiful in the way that this story is unfolding. And so the first aspect, let's talk about as Mercury, who is kind of moving out of this exact trine, but moving, grand water trine, but moving into an opposition with Uranus, the wildcard planet, and also trining Neptune at 29 degrees Pisces. So the opposition with Uranus, let me double check this, I believe begins first, yes, because we're in the 28 degree range there. We've got Mercury at 28 degrees Scorpio, Uranus at 28 degrees Taurus, and then we have Neptune at 29 degrees Pisces. So there's something interesting to me about moving through this last month and a half or plus a week of the grand water trine, which was really helping us move into that wise knowing from the intuitive and emotional spaces. This is that sense of like, on paper, this doesn't sound like a big deal, but in my body, it feels loaded and charged. And even though we might not always have the logic and data to support it, being able to trust that wise intuitive knowing in our bodies and that felt sense, like the experience outside of language, data, and facts. So to me, going through that all together collectively, and then if you've got any planets, places, or planets or angles in those late degrees, you also are feeling this very personally. And then all of a sudden, Mercury comes into this opposition with Uranus. This is his third opposition with Uranus. Because he did his retrograde last month, we know that we had the pre-shadow where he came into an opposition with Uranus, and I will look up those dates and share them with you in a minute. And then he, during the retrograde, was going backwards for more of that introspective opposition with Uranus. And here we are, a last time in the post-shadow, making the opposition with Uranus. Now, Uranus, as a reminder, is the wild card planet. Expect the unexpected. It's also the higher level of the mind. It's the genius, okay? It's very innovative. It thinks outside the box, and it's this like high level mental cerebral space. Mercury is the individual human mind. This is the logos. This is how we are making connections with ideas, people, places, things, and how we are processing things through the logic and the cerebral spaces. So there's something really, really striking that after this intuitive waters that we were, dare I say, forced to swim with, because we were going to exhaust ourselves if we're trying to go against that current. I also talked about how water erodes and reveals things that were buried. There's more exposure and also more space within us, that the waters have carved out more space inside. And then we come into this whoosh, opposition, lightning bolt moment, something possibly coming in that is surprising, that you didn't see coming in, that's striking, that can change the way you think about things and the way that you are holding things in your mind. And I think there's something really beautiful about this because as Mercury comes into this final conversation with Uranus on these specific zodiacs, there's this opportunity to work with, we have Scorpio, which is fixed water, Taurus, which is fixed earth. So we're in the fixed mode where things can be kind of rigid, where Uranus can come in and just kind of like throw some cracks in the ground and all of a sudden things open up. And if, Uranus is shaking up the things that we find that are stable, material things, life, Taurus is said to, if we're going to think of everything that piles into there, it's all of the materials and the resources of Earth. So we can think about that, Uranus moving through there using that script, fixed Earth, something very solid, maybe something you always thought would be as it is, and now, whoa, something's happening, in opposition to fixed water. So this is the iceberg. This is where there is a depth, an incredible depth available. And so, again, as a reminder, Mercury is Hermes, the only god who could travel to the underworld to deliver messages to Hades. Scorpio is bringing you to the underworld. So these are like transformation about thoughts and perceptions on an incredibly deep level. We've been talking a lot about shadow work as we were in Scorpio season, and the planets who parade around the sun were also moving through Scorpio and the Grand Water Trine. So we've been talking a lot about shadow work. And this might be something interesting that comes up in that kind of way you perceive yourself on these really deep levels. Or, who knows? It could be something external, just something big. It is an opposition, so sometimes that does mean that something external happens that brings us forward quickly because of who we're dealing with. And so just notice if there's anything that comes up when you think about the last time Mercury was talking to Uranus in this way was November 19th. This was when Mercury was retrograde. So the energy was much more introspective. It was doing deep dives internally. And prior to that, there was a conversation that was had between Mercury and Uranus on October 29th, but they were in different zodiacs, okay? So they were at the 0 degree mark of Sagittarius and Gemini. And then as Uranus and his retrograde ticked backwards, as Mercury zoomed backwards, they made another contact a little later than mid-November, November 19th. And then this is the final pass through. So sometimes we can pluck out some themes and patterns from that retrograde cycle to kind of notice possibly what's coming up. But again, we're dealing with Uranus, so who really knows? The whole mantra of expect the unexpected. So I don't know how much strategizing and pattern identification we can do, because Uranus's whole intention is to break down patterns and rules and structures so that new things can come forward. So I think that's really striking. Take it if it feels helpful, toss it if it doesn't. On the same day that Mercury is opposing Uranus, we have Neptune stationing direct at 29 degrees Pisces. Uranus has been spending a lot of time at this last degree of Pisces. And he will be moving into Aries and will not be back in Pisces in this lifetime. So there's something about this clearing out. It's like Neptune moved into Aries last spring and moved into a very different zodiac script, right? Cardinal fire from mutable water. And so there's a taking action, there's a pioneering energy, there's new beginnings. It's called the birth portal because Aries starts the zodiacal wheel. And then it's like Neptune went, oh, wait a minute, I need to go back into the swirly waters of Pisces one last time to do some final work to tie up the loose ends, although I don't know how tight they'll get in Pisces because everything's real loosey-goosey in that zodiac sign. And it's interesting to me because Mercury will be trining, because it's going to tick over from that opposition with Uranus that we were just talking about, into a trine with Neptune. Now this is interesting because this can be a test of the grand water trine that we were in before, and then we have this like lightning bolt epiphany moment possibly from Uranus about the way we're thinking about things, and then we get into this kind of slippery place trining Neptune. And Neptune in its highest octave is this beautiful high heart level compassion and forgiveness and like that unconditional love for all, like for the entire collective, like that Christ consciousness level, the great spirit they'll often call Neptune. And there's something so moving and beautiful about that. In its lower octave, it represents escapism, illusions, living in Delulu land, not paying attention to reality. It's over idealistic, fantasy, really taking us out of reality. So we have this lightning bolt moment, the mind does, the way we're thinking about things. And then we move into this it feels almost like this, like a final pass through before everybody moves into fire. And in this book, The Way of the Owl, I thought of this little section in here, and it's I can't remember what it's being clear about the invisible, which is really interesting to me because when we're being clear about the invisible, when we think about Neptune and Pisces, it's all kind of can feel like smoke and mirrors, like it is the invisible, ungrounded place. But we just had this shocking revelation come through from fixed Earth Uranus and fixed water Scorpio. So I feel like this Mercury can have his wits about him as we move into a place where we start to go, whoa, what's up, what's down, where am I? And so I wanted to read this little couple sentences, but it says, fiction, fantasy, and illusion will stimulate your creativity up to a point. Beyond that, they will distract and confuse. Temper the seduction of illusion with a quest for the truth. Fly as high as you like, but maintain contact with the ground at all times. And that to me describes this journey that Mercury has been on. Because Mercury, after having this conversation with Pluto, moves into Sagittarius, not his favorite place to be. So I kind of love that he's kind of doing this kind of boot camp on his way back into Sagittarius, still in the post shadow until 6 degrees Sagittarius. So I think that's till December 16th. He'll be in new territory. So there is this kind of like, okay, we already stepped into the Sag script, which is all about the big picture and like grand big ideas. And Mercury's like, I like the details. I like to know how to like move quickly. This feels a little nebulous to me. And so we went back into Scorpio, went through all these different journeys, joining with the heart space of Venus, enacting the water trine, making oppositions with Uranus, and then this kind of final, like, what are you made of conversation with Neptune before stepping back into Sagittarius, the fire sign, where when we're in fire, there is more of that kind of life force ability to feel inspired and to take action and just kind of have that zeal and zest for life again, which is so nice coming out of the deep waters. It's kind of like coming up from the ocean bottom and feeling the warm sun on your face. And so that is just something I wanted to highlight because after that, right at those first degrees of Sagittarius, Mercury will make a sextile to Pluto. And so the sextile to Pluto is a very productive conversation. It's Hades saying to Hermes, okay, tell me, what did you learn on your journeying? As he kind of sits and allows Mercury to share what has changed. And then Pluto kind of gets to kind of put the final stamp on maybe these new ideas and perspectives and ways of understanding ourselves, this world, our relationships, our futures, our souls, whatever we might be chewing on. And this is, again, something we have been working on. These are themes that are not brand new. I mean, again, Uranus was involved, so it could be something out of left field that you're like, this just landed in my lap and now I'm working on it. But I really love this. There's something so beautiful about the story unfolding with Mercury and the way he is conversing with the outer planets in this specific geometry. Opportunity for like Uranus, which can sometimes be like the tower moment of everything crumbling into row. And then Neptune being like, here we are in this kind of wide open space. What do you think now? And it's like, okay, how do I find myself when everything, all the structures had crumbled? And then Pluto showing up and saying, all right, look where you've been. Where do you want to go? What do you need to let go and let die in service of that future forward motion? And this is all happening in the last month of 2025, the year of the snake. And something that always stands out to me when I think of the snake and shedding of skin is that the last skin that the snake sheds is the face. And during this time, the snake loses sight when it is shedding literally off of like eyeballs. You know, you've seen a snake skin, and there's no sight, and it is reliant on its other senses. And there's something that just the way that this grand water trine brought us into this last month, it just gives me like chills thinking about it, because there's something so eloquent about this story. And it's like, okay, when you can, and Mercury being a big player in this, because Mercury does want to use the eyes, does want to use logic, does want to say, okay, what's the facts, what's the data? And there's so much coming in right now that we need to use our other senses. And I think that's going to continue. And so this kind of transformative journey that Mercury has been on in this last retrograde, to be able to expand and open up to trusting and understanding other ways of knowing outside of sight and language. And then as we kind of finish this last squeeze of 2025 before stepping into 2026, which is going to be a year of activity, movement, the year of the horse. What does a horse want to do? Run wild and has so much force behind it, right? It's majestic, and it's like, get out of the way. And if you can feel a little out of control if you're on a horse that is fully at full speed. So there's this really important piece that are part of our transition that we're all going through collectively and individually as we move through this last month of December. And while the astrology doesn't look like, whoa, super extreme or anything like that, like some of the previous months of this year, it's still intense as we are wrapping up an intense year of release and shedding and grief and loss and heartbreak and just so much of just this peeling it off. Because as we continue to peel it off, we get closer and closer to that true essence of who we are. You know, who we are from that soul sense, who you are beyond your name, who you are beyond your skin and your roles and the many different masks that you wear in this life, like underneath that, your true essence. And so often the way that we get to those places, often with assistance from dear Hades, is to kind of hit some of these rock bottom places and these painful places, and to meet ourselves there if we are able to, if we're able to answer the call. And I feel like there's been a lot of invitation and a lot of calls this year for us to really get into that humble as in right size with ourselves, this world, our communities, what we're here to do in service of opening our heart space and continuing to have that open heart, because the world needs you with your heart open. The world needs you in your full expression of gifts. And it needs you now more than ever, because we are all going through such a huge transition individually, in our families, and collectively. And so I encourage you to continue with your practices. Again, I think I said this a while back. I don't know how we can get through right now without some practices. I think we were able to kind of scoot by a little bit on autopilot in the past, but that it doesn't really seem to be cutting it this year and moving forward. So whatever practice makes your soul sing, do it, and do it often, whatever that might be. And I'll be back with more information as we move closer to the beautiful new moon, the winter solstice, and starting Capricorn season. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share this video so that this little baby channel can continue to get out there for anybody who it might be in service to. If you're interested in working together, I do birth chart readings, and you can find out information on how to book directly online at danielleknapp.com. And then if you're interested in working together therapeutically and you are in the state of Texas, my therapy website is startwithintherapy.com. So let me know if this resonates, if you've been feeling this energy, how you're feeling this last month down in the comments. I love hearing from you guys, and I'll be wishing you many, many blessings, and I'll be back soon.